The Grand Harbor Hotel looked like something out of a fairy tale that evening. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across the polished marble floors. Women in expensive gowns glided past men in tuxedos, their jewelry catching the light with every movement. The air smelled of fresh roses and expensive perfume. This wasn't just any Saturday night. This was the annual charity gala for the city's Arts Foundation, and everyone who was anyone had shown up. At the center of the grand ballroom sat a magnificent black piano, its surface so shiny you could see your reflection in it. And seated at that piano was Vincent Laurent, the man everyone had come to see. Well, partly to see. They'd also come to be seen, to network, to show off their designer clothes. But Vincent was definitely part of the draw. Vincent was everything you'd expect from a world-class pianist. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd studied at the most prestigious music schools in Europe. His performances had graced concert halls from Paris to Tokyo. Critics called him brilliant. His students called him demanding. His colleagues called him, well, they chose their words carefully. As his fingers danced across the keys, playing a complicated piece by Chopin, the crowd stood in small groups, wine glasses in hand, pretending to listen while they whispered about business deals and vacation homes. A few actually paid attention, nodding along to the music like they understood every nuance. Vincent noticed everything from his position at the piano. He saw who was truly listening and who was faking it. The fakers annoyed him, but he'd never show it, not here. Not in front of potential donors and wealthy patrons. The piece ended with a flourish. Polite applause rippled through the room. Vincent stood, gave a small bow, and reached for his water glass. That's when he noticed her. She was carrying a tray of champagne glasses, weaving carefully between the guests in their expensive outfits. Her uniform was simple, the standard black and white worn by all the hotel staff. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She looked to be in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that should have caught Vincent's attention among all these glamorous people. But something did catch his attention. As she passed near the piano, she stopped. Just for a moment. Her eyes closed and her head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something only she could hear. The music had already ended, but she stood there as if the notes were still hanging in the air around her. One of her co-workers, another woman in the same uniform, touched her arm gently. "Elena, you okay?" The woman Elena opened her eyes and smiled. "Sorry, that piece always gets me." "You know classical music?" her co-worker asked, sounding surprised. "A little," Elena said quietly, adjusting her grip on the tray. "My father loved it." As they started to move away, Elena added something almost under her breath, though the third movement could have used more expression. The tempo felt rushed in places where it should breathe. She said it softly, meant only for her co-worker. But Vincent heard it. Oh, he heard it perfectly. His jaw tightened. His fingers, still resting on the edge of the piano, curled slightly. Someone had just criticized his playing. Not just someone, a server, a hotel worker, someone who probably couldn't tell the difference between Mozart and Metallica, and she had the audacity to comment on his tempo. His expression? Vincent prided himself on his control, but this was too much. He stood up straighter, set down his water glass with a sharp click, and walked directly toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "I couldn't help but overhear your commentary." Elena turned, her eyes widening slightly. A few nearby guests stopped their conversations, sensing something interesting was about to happen. "I'm sorry," Elena said, her face flushing. "My playing," Vincent continued, loud enough now that more people were turning to look. "You said the third movement could use more expression, that the tempo was rushed." Elena's co-worker quietly slipped away, leaving her standing there alone with her tray of champagne glasses. Elena's hands trembled slightly, making the glasses clink together. "I didn't mean any disrespect," she said quickly. "I was just talking to my friend. I shouldn't have said anything." No, please," Vincent said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm always eager to learn from experts. Tell me, where did you study music?" "Juilliard? The Royal Academy? Or perhaps you just picked up your expertise from—" "What, exactly? YouTube videos?" A few people in the crowd laughed. Not kind laughter. The nervous kind that happens when someone's being put on the spot. Elena's face turned a deeper shade of red. I really need to get back to work. In a moment, Vincent said, stepping slightly closer. His voice was pleasant, conversational, but there was steel underneath. I'm genuinely curious. You work here at the hotel, serving drinks, and yet you feel qualified to critique a performance by someone who's dedicated their entire life to mastering this instrument. Help me understand that. The crowd was growing now. More people abandoning their conversations to watch the drama unfold. Elena looked around, clearly wishing she could disappear into the floor. It was just an opinion, she said quietly. Everyone's entitled to their opinion about music, aren't they? Opinions based on knowledge, certainly, Vincent replied. But uninformed opinions? Those are just noise. He gestured grandly toward the piano. Since you seem to have such refined taste, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the proper way to play that movement? Show us all how it should really be done? The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Elena shook her head quickly. No, thank you. I really can't. Why not? Vincent pressed. If you understand music well enough to criticize mine, surely you can play a little. Or were you just talking without any real understanding? That happens sometimes, doesn't it? People hear others discuss art and they mimic the words without grasping the meaning. Someone in the crowd whispered, "This is harsh." Another voice answered. He has a point, though. Elena's supervisor, a stern-looking man in a hotel manager's suit, appeared at the edge of the crowd. He looked concerned, probably worried about a scene affecting the hotel's reputation. He caught Elena's eye and gave her a small nod, a silent permission to handle this however she needed to. I appreciate the offer, Elena said, her voice steadier now despite the flush in her cheeks. But I'm working. I can't just abandon my duties to play piano for entertainment. It's settled then, Vincent said, turning to walk back to the piano. Another critic who can't back up their words with action. He was almost back to his bench when Elena spoke again, louder this time. 5 minutes. Vincent stopped and turned around slowly. The crowd held its breath. Elena set her tray down carefully on a nearby table. Her hands were still shaking, but something in her expression had changed. There was pain there, yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like anger, or maybe determination. I'll take a 5-minute break, she said, looking at her supervisor, who nodded his approval. Then she looked directly at Vincent. And I'll play your third movement, but not to prove anything to you. Just to show that music doesn't belong only to people with fancy degrees and concert hall experience. It belongs to anyone who truly understands it. The crowd murmured with excitement. Vincent's confident expression flickered for just a second before returning. He gestured toward the piano bench with exaggerated courtesy. By all means, he said. The stage is yours. As Elena walked toward the piano, her practical work shoes silent on the expensive carpet, Vincent crossed his arms and smiled. This would be over in seconds. She'd play a few awkward notes, realize she was in over her head, and slink away embarrassed. He'd proven his point. The natural order would be restored. He had no idea that everything he thought he knew was about to be shattered. Elena walked toward the piano like she was walking toward something that both terrified and called to her. Each step felt heavy, weighted down by years of distance from this moment. The crowd parted silently, creating a path for her. Nobody spoke. Even the waiters stopped moving, standing frozen with their trays balanced in midair. Vincent stepped aside with an exaggerated sweep of his arm, like a king granting audience to a peasant. He was already savoring his victory. In his mind, this would be over in 30 seconds. Maybe a minute if she was stubborn. Either way, the lesson would be taught. Don't criticize your betters. Elena reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, just staring at the keys. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished black surface. She looked tired, older than her years. The uniform she wore suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Take your time, Vincent said from behind her, his voice dripping with false kindness. Though I should mention, the guests are waiting. We do have a schedule to keep. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Even those who'd been entertained by Vincent's challenge were starting to feel that maybe he was taking this too far. But nobody said anything. That's how it always worked with powerful people. Everyone watched. Few intervened. Elena sat down slowly on the bench. She adjusted her position, moving slightly forward, then back. Her hands hovered over the keys but didn't touch them. From where Vincent stood, he could see her fingers trembling. "Do you need help finding middle C?" he asked. More nervous laughter from the audience. Elena's supervisor, the hotel manager, looked genuinely worried now. This could become a complaint. A lawsuit, even. Guest harasses employee, humiliates her publicly. But he also knew Vincent Laurent was one of the hotel's most influential clients. The man brought in business. Recommended the venue to other wealthy musicians and artists. What was one housekeeper's dignity compared to that? Elena closed her eyes. Just for a second. And in that second, something changed. When her eyes opened again, they looked different, clearer. Like she'd made peace with something. Her hands stopped shaking. She placed them gently on the keys, her fingers finding their positions without hesitation, without having to look. That's when Vincent felt the first tiny flutter of doubt in his stomach. Just a flutter. Nothing serious. But the way she positioned her hands, the natural curve of her fingers, the way her shoulders settled, it looked practiced. Too practiced for someone who'd never really played. "Ready when you are," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Elena didn't respond. She was somewhere else now. Her eyes focused on something beyond the piano, beyond the room, beyond all of them. She took one deep breath, held it for a moment, then released it slowly. And then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Vincent's smirk started to return. See, just as he thought. But then something happened. The hesitant notes weren't hesitant because she didn't know what she was doing. They were hesitant because that's how the piece should begin. The opening of Chopin's Nocturne wasn't meant to burst forth. It was meant to emerge, like dawn breaking slowly over a dark landscape. The notes grew stronger, more confident. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with increasing fluidity. She wasn't just playing the right notes. She was shaping them, bending them, giving each one space to breathe before the next one arrived. Vincent's smirk vanished completely. He took a step closer, watching her hands. The technique was solid. More than solid. Her finger positions were textbook perfect, but there was nothing mechanical about the way she played. Each phrase flowed into the next like water finding its natural path. The crowd felt it too. The whispers stopped. Wineglasses were lowered. A woman near the front, someone who'd been checking her phone moments before, looked up with her mouth slightly open. Another guest, an older man who'd been in the middle of complaining about his stock portfolio, turned fully toward the piano and went silent. Elena reached the second movement, the part Vincent had played earlier. But where his version had been technically flawless but somewhat cold, Elena's version was alive. She took the tempo slightly slower than he had, but not in a way that dragged. Instead, it gave the melody room to speak, room to express something words couldn't capture. Her left hand maintained a steady rhythm while her right hand danced through the melody, sometimes rushing slightly ahead, sometimes pulling back, like a conversation between two old friends who didn't need words to understand each other. The dynamics shifted constantly, loud passages that made you sit up straight, soft passages that made you lean in to hear better. Vincent stood frozen, his earlier confidence crumbling with each measure she played. This wasn't just competent. This was exceptional. His mind raced through possibilities. Maybe she'd taken lessons as a child. Rich parents who fell on hard times. That had to be it. Some basic training years ago that she was now stretching beyond its limits. Any moment now she'd hit a difficult passage and the facade would crack. But she didn't crack. She reached the third movement, the one she'd criticized. The one Vincent had rushed through, eager to get to the dramatic ending. Elena approached it completely differently. She let it breathe. In places where Vincent had pushed forward, Elena pulled back, allowing individual notes to ring out, to find their own space in the air. There was a passage about 2 minutes in, where the right hand had to execute a series of rapid runs, while the left hand maintained a complex bass line. It was technically demanding, the kind of thing that separated amateurs from professionals. Vincent had played it perfectly, every note crisp and clear. He'd practiced that section for weeks when he first learned the piece. Elena played it like she was born knowing it. Her hands moved independently, each doing something completely different, yet somehow creating a unified whole that was greater than its parts. The runs sparkled like light on water. The bass line rumbled like distant thunder. Together, they created something that made several people in the audience forget to breathe. A woman in a silver gown had tears running down her cheeks. She wasn't sad. She wasn't happy. She was just feeling something she couldn't name. something the music was pulling out of her. A man next to her husband probably, reached over and took her hand without taking his eyes off Elena. Vincent's face had gone pale. His hands, which moments ago had been crossed confidently over his chest, now hung at his sides. He watched Elena play and saw things in her technique that he'd spent years trying to master. The way she used the pedal, barely touching it, creating just enough resonance without muddying the sound. The way she shaped phrases, knowing instinctively where to crescendo and where to pull back. The way she leaned into certain passages, her whole body becoming part of the music. This wasn't someone who'd taken a few childhood lessons. This was someone who'd lived with music, breathed it, made it part of her soul. You couldn't fake this level of understanding. You couldn't YouTube your way into this kind of mastery. This took years, decades maybe, serious, dedicated, professional-level training. Elena moved into the final section of the third movement. This was where Vincent had really pushed the tempo, racing toward the conclusion. Elena took it slower, drawing out the sadness inherent in the melody. It wasn't just notes anymore. It was a story. A story about loss, about longing, about beautiful things that slip away despite our best efforts to hold on to them. The final notes came, soft and gentle, like a whisper of goodbye. Elena held the last chord, letting it fade naturally, not rushing to release the keys. The sound dissolved into silence so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence stretched out 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. It felt sacred, like breaking it would shatter something precious. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. Not the polite, scattered applause from before. Real applause, enthusiastic, others joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was erupting in applause. People weren't just clapping. They were standing. A standing ovation for a housekeeper who'd just played a piano at a charity gala. Elena sat motionless at the bench, her hands still resting on the keys. Her shoulders began to shake. At first, Vincent thought she was laughing, riding the high of the moment. But then he saw her wipe her face quickly with the back of her hand. She wasn't laughing. She was crying. The applause continued, washing over Elena like a wave she wasn't prepared for. She kept her head down, her hands still resting on the piano keys as if letting go would make her collapse. The sound of all those people clapping felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else in some other life she used to know. Vincent stood behind her, completely frozen. His brain was working overtime, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. He'd challenged her, expecting humiliation. Instead, he'd just watched someone play with a depth and skill that exceeded his own. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd made a terrible mistake. A massive, public, unforgivable mistake. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd, moving with surprising speed for someone who had to be in her 70s. She wore a deep blue gown that probably cost more than a car, and her silver hair was styled in an elegant updo. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but her eyes, bright and sharp behind designer glasses, were fixed entirely on Elena. "Excuse me, pardon me," the woman said, working her way to the front. People moved aside for her automatically. She was clearly someone important, someone who commanded respect in this room. She reached the piano and stopped, staring at Elena's profile. Elena still hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged the applause, hadn't moved except for the slight trembling in her shoulders. "Elena," the woman said softly, then louder. "Elena Sandoval." The name cut through the applause like a knife. People started to quiet down, sensing something significant was happening. Vincent's eyes widened. Sandoval. Why did that name sound familiar? Elena finally looked up, her eyes red and wet with tears. When she saw the older woman, her face crumpled. "Dr. Whitmore," she whispered. "Dr. Catherine Whitmore." Vincent's mind clicked into place. She was a legend in the classical music world. Former professor at the conservatory, retired now but still one of the most respected music educators in the country. She'd taught dozens of successful pianists, written books on piano pedagogy, served as a judge at international competitions, and she was looking at Elena like she'd seen a ghost. "It is you," Dr. Whitmore said, her voice thick with emotion. "After all these years, I thought I recognized your hands the way you hold your wrists, but when you started playing, I was certain." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even Vincent leaned in, desperate to understand what was happening. Elena stood up from the bench, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her uniform looked even more out of place now, standing next to Dr. Whitmore's elegance. "I didn't think anyone would remember," she said quietly. "Remember?" Dr. Whitmore's voice rose. "How could anyone forget? You were extraordinary. You still are, clearly." She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "For those of you who don't know, this woman, Elena Sandoval, was one of the most promising pianists of her generation." Vincent felt his stomach drop through the floor. No, Dr. Whitmore continued. 15 years ago, Elena won the International Chopin competition in Warsaw. Do you understand what that means? Hundreds of pianists compete. Only one wins. She was 21 years old and she beat performers who'd been training their entire lives. The judges called her interpretation of Chopin revelatory. She had recording contracts waiting, invitations to perform with major orchestras, everything a classical musician dreams of. The crowd murmured, looking at Elena with new eyes. The woman in the housekeeper's uniform wasn't just good. She was world-class, award-winning, the kind of talent that came along once in a generation. Elena closed her eyes as if the words were physically painful to hear. "That was a long time ago," she said. "Not that long," Dr. Whitmore said gently. "You're what, 36 now? 37? You should be at the height of your career. You should be touring, recording, teaching the next generation. What happened? Why did you disappear?" Vincent wanted to disappear himself. He wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. He'd mocked her, called her uninformed, suggested she'd learned from YouTube videos. The memory of his own words made him feel physically sick. A man in the crowd called out, "Yeah, what happened? Why haven't we heard of you?" Elena opened her eyes and looked out at all the faces staring at her. Rich people, comfortable people, people who'd never had to make the kind of choices she'd made. For a moment, Vincent thought she wouldn't answer. Then she took a deep breath. "My father got sick," she said simply. 3 months after I won the competition. Cancer, aggressive, fast-moving. The kind that requires immediate treatment, constant care, medications that insurance barely covers. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's drinks. "My mother had passed away when I was a teenager," Elena continued, her voice steady but soft. "It was just my father, my 2 younger brothers, and me. The boys were still in school. Dad couldn't work. Someone had to pay the bills, buy the medicine, keep food on the table. The prize money from the competition helped, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough." Dr. Whitmore reached out and took Elena's hand. "Why didn't you reach out?" "There were foundations, grants, people who would have helped." Elena smiled sadly. "Pride, maybe. Or shame, I don't know. At first I thought I could manage both. Practice at night, work during the day, care for Dad on weekends. But classical music doesn't work that way. You can't be halfway in. The opportunities I'd been offered, they had expiration dates. Orchestras moved on to other soloists. Recording labels found other artists. By the time Dad passed away 2 years later, I'd missed my window." A woman in the crowd dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Others looked down at their expensive shoes, perhaps thinking about their own good fortune. "I tried to come back," Elena said. "I really did. But it had been too long. I'd lost my momentum, my connections, my confidence, and my brothers still needed support through college. I couldn't afford to take the risk of trying to rebuild a music career with no guarantee of income. So I took steady work instead. Cleaning, serving, whatever paid the bills." She looked down at her uniform, smoothing the fabric with one hand. "This job at the hotel, it's honest work. It pays decently. It has health insurance. My brothers both graduated now. One's an engineer, the other's a teacher. They turned out okay. That's what matters." Vincent felt like he might throw up. She'd given up everything, sacrificed a brilliant career to take care of her family, and he'd stood there with all his privileges, all his advantages, and humiliated her for sport. Because his ego couldn't handle a tiny bit of criticism, Dr. Whitmore was shaking her head. "But your talent, Elena. Talent like yours doesn't just disappear. We all heard it just now. You still have it." "Having talent and having a career are 2 different things," Elena said. "I made my peace with it. I still play sometimes, at home, on the old keyboard my father bought me when I was 8. It's enough." "It's not enough," Dr. Whitmore said firmly. "It's not nearly enough. You should be performing, Elena. The world should hear you." Elena started to respond, but her supervisor appeared at her elbow, looking apologetic but firm. "Miss Sandoval, your break is over. We still have guests to serve." The reminder of reality hung in the air like a cold breeze. Here she was, having just played like an angel, being told to get back to carrying drink trays. The contrast was almost cruel, but Elena just nodded. Of course. Thank you for letting me take the time. She turned to Dr. Whitmore. It was good to see you again. She started to walk away, back to her abandoned tray of champagne glasses, back to being invisible, just another server in a uniform. Vincent's voice stopped her. Wait. Everyone turned to look at him. He stepped forward, his face pale but determined. This was it. The moment where he either stayed silent and lived with his shame, or spoke up and tried to make something right. Elena stopped walking but didn't turn around right away. Her hand rested on the tray she'd just picked up, the champagne glasses reflecting the chandelier light above. The entire ballroom waited, hundreds of eyes moving between her and Vincent. Vincent's throat felt dry. He'd given hundreds of performances in his life, spoken to crowds of thousands, done interviews on television. But right now, finding the right words felt impossible. Everything he might say seemed inadequate, too small for the enormity of what he'd done. I owe you an apology, he began, and his voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and continued. No, that's not strong enough. I owe you more than an apology. I humiliated you. I mocked you. I challenged you to play just so I could watch you fail and feel superior. Elena turned slowly to face him. Her expression was unreadable. Vincent took a step closer, his hands trembling at his sides. I stood here in my expensive suit with all my credentials and my comfortable life, and I treated you like you were nothing. Like your opinion didn't matter because of what you do for work, because of how you were dressed. Because I'm supposed to be the expert and you're supposed to be, what, beneath me? His voice grew stronger, more passionate. The crowd watched, transfixed. This wasn't the confident, controlled Vincent Laurent they knew. This was someone stripped raw, facing his own ugliness. But the truth is, you're a better musician than I'll ever be, Vincent said. I heard it in every note you played. My technique is polished because I've had every advantage money can buy. The best teachers, the best schools, no distractions, no worries about rent or medical bills or taking care of family. I've had the luxury of being selfish with my music. He gestured toward the piano. You played one piece after years away from performing, and you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Music isn't about perfection. It's not about showing off or proving you're better than someone else. It's about truth, about feeling, about touching something real in people's souls. I lost that somewhere along the way. Maybe I never really had it. Elena's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. She just listened. What I did to you tonight was cruel, Vincent continued. It was small and petty and mean. I can't take it back. I can't undo the embarrassment I tried to cause you. But I need you to know that I'm deeply, truly sorry, not because you turned out to be Elena Sandoval, world-class pianist, but because you're a human being who deserved respect and kindness, and I gave you neither. The silence that followed was heavy. Someone in the crowd sniffled. Another person whispered, "Wow." Elena set her tray back down on a nearby table. She walked toward Vincent slowly, stopping a few feet in front of him. For a long moment, she just looked at him, studying his face like she was trying to decide something important. Thank you, she said finally, for apologizing. That takes courage, especially in front of all these people. Vincent shook his head. It takes courage to give up your dreams to take care of your family. It takes courage to keep going when life takes everything from you. I just said some words. You lived through hell and came out the other side still able to play like that. You're the one with courage, Elena smiled sadly. Life doesn't give us the challenges we want. It gives us the ones we need. I don't regret taking care of my father. I don't regret helping my brothers. I'd do it all again, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt to walk away from music. Dr. Whitmore, who'd been watching the exchange quietly, stepped forward. Then don't walk away from it anymore. Elena turned to her. Dr. Whitmore, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it's not that simple. I have bills to pay. A life that doesn't include concert halls and recording studios. What if it could? Dr. Whitmore said. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of determination that had made her a legend in the music world. She turned to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we came here tonight to support the arts, didn't we? To invest in talent and beauty and culture. Well, I can't think of a better investment than standing right in front of us, she pointed at Elena. This woman deserves a second chance. She deserves the career that was stolen from her by circumstances beyond her control. And we have the power to give her that chance. The crowd murmured, some people nodding, others looking confused about where this was going. Dr. Whitmore pulled out her phone and tapped at the screen for a moment. The charity tonight was supposed to raise funds for youth music programs, a worthy cause, but I'm prepared to write a personal check for double what we were hoping to raise. My money can still go to those programs. She looked around the room. But the money raised tonight, all of it, I propose we redirect it to Elena. Elena's eyes went wide. No, you can't. I couldn't possibly. Hear me out, Dr. Whitmore said, holding up a hand. You need time to practice, to prepare for a comeback. You need to be able to take leave from work without losing your income. You need professional recordings to send to orchestras and venues. You need new performance attire, travel expenses, marketing materials. All of that costs money. Money you don't have, she turned back to the crowd. We raised $47,000 tonight through ticket sales and donations. That's enough to give Elena 6 months to focus entirely on music, to prepare for a comeback recital, to rebuild the career she should never have lost. A man in the crowd, someone who'd been silent until now, spoke up. I'll match that amount. $47,000 from my foundation. A woman in red raised her hand. My husband and I will contribute $20,000. Another voice. Put me down for 15. Elena stood frozen as pledge after pledge came in. People pulling out phones, making notes, promising money. Some gave thousands, others hundreds. It didn't matter. They all wanted to help. Vincent watched it happen. Watched this community come together for someone they'd barely known existed 10 minutes ago. He felt something shifting inside him, something uncomfortable but necessary. He'd spent so long thinking about music as a competition, as a way to prove he was better than others. But this was what music was supposed to do. Bring people together, create connection, inspire generosity. I want to contribute as well, Vincent said, his voice cutting through the excited chatter. But not just money. Everyone looked at him. Elena, he said, turning to her, if you'll accept, I'd like to help you prepare for your comeback. Coaching, accompaniment, whatever you need, no charge. I'm not your equal as a musician, I understand that now. But I know the business side of classical music. I know who to talk to, how to book venues, how to get the right people to listen. Let me use my connections to open doors for you. It's the least I can do. Elena's hand came up to cover her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This is too much. All of this is too much. Dr. Whitmore put an arm around her shoulders. It's not too much. It's exactly what should have happened 15 years ago. We're just late, that's all. Better late than never. Elena looked around the room at all these strangers who'd suddenly become her champions. At Dr. Whitmore, who'd remembered her after all these years. At Vincent, who'd gone from antagonist to ally in the span of one evening. The weight of it all seemed to hit her at once, and she sat down heavily on the nearest chair. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Dr. Whitmore said gently. Say you'll take this gift and use it to share your talent with the world. Say you'll let us help you finish what you started all those years ago. Elena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just moved across piano keys with such grace and power. These hands had washed dishes and scrubbed floors and carried trays. They'd held her father's hand as he died and ruffled her brother's hair, and signed 1,000 checks to keep the bills paid. They'd sacrificed so much, maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them make music again. She looked up, her face wet with tears, but her eyes clear and determined. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll do it. The ballroom erupted in applause for the second time that night, but this time Elena was smiling through her tears. 3 months passed like a dream Elena kept expecting to wake up from. Every morning she'd open her eyes in her small apartment and think, maybe it had all been a fantasy. The gala, the piano, the money, the promises. But then she'd see the brand new electric piano in the corner of her living room, a gift from Dr. Whitmore, and she'd know it was real. The first week had been the hardest. After years of working constantly, of every moment being scheduled around shifts and obligations, suddenly having time felt wrong, guilty. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning out of habit, ready to get dressed for work before remembering she'd taken a leave of absence. The hotel had been surprisingly understanding. Her manager, the same one who'd watched everything unfold that night, told her the position would be waiting if she wanted it back. But he hoped she wouldn't need it. Vincent had kept his word. He showed up at her apartment 3 days after the gala, professional and respectful, asking when she'd like to start preparing. They'd agreed on meeting 4 times a week at the conservatory where Dr. Whitmore had arranged free practice room access. Their first session had been awkward. Elena sat at the grand piano in the practice room while Vincent pulled up a chair, keeping a respectful distance. Neither of them mentioned that night at first. They just focused on music. Vincent would suggest a piece Elena would play, and he'd offer feedback on the business side of things. Which pieces would appeal to venue managers? Which ones would showcase her unique interpretive style? How to structure a program that told a story? What surprised Elena most was how much Vincent had changed. Or maybe he hadn't changed. Maybe she was just seeing a different side of him. The arrogant performer from the gala had been replaced by someone thoughtful, someone who listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about how she heard the music, what certain pieces meant to her. He took notes on his phone and sent her recordings of different pianists interpreting the same works. Asking what she thought, treating her opinions with genuine respect. "You know," Elena said one day during their second month of working together, "you're a better teacher than you probably realize." Vincent looked up from his notes, surprised. "I'm not teaching you anything. You already know how to play. You're teaching me how to believe in myself again," she said. "That's harder than learning any piece of music." He'd gone quiet after that, but she saw something shift in his expression, something that looked like gratitude mixed with ongoing regret. The money the gala attendees had pledged came through, every penny of it, nearly $130,000 in total. Elena cried when Dr. Whitmore showed her the bank account they'd set up. It was more money than she'd made in the last 3 years combined. More importantly, it was freedom. Freedom to practice 6 hours a day without worrying about rent. Freedom to buy proper sheet music instead of printing blurry copies from the library. Freedom to remember what it felt like to be a musician instead of someone who used to be a musician. Dr. Whitmore had been busy too. She'd called in favors, contacted old colleagues, pulled strings Elena didn't even know existed. The comeback recital was scheduled at Thompson Hall, one of the most prestigious concert venues in the city. The same hall where Elena had dreamed of performing when she was a student. The date was set for exactly 3 months after the gala. Just enough time to prepare, Dr. Whitmore said, but not enough time to overthink and get scared. Elena's brothers had been stunned when she told them everything. Daniel, the engineer, had wanted to refuse the money, insisting Elena had already given them enough. But Luis, the teacher, understood better. "You gave us our dreams, sis," he'd said. "Now take yours back." They both promised to be at the recital, front row, no matter what. As the date approached, Elena felt the nerves building. It was one thing to play spontaneously at a gala, riding on adrenaline and emotion. It was another thing entirely to plan a full recital, to sell tickets, to have people come specifically to hear her play. What if that night at the hotel had been a fluke? What if she'd lost whatever magic she'd once had? Vincent noticed her anxiety during their final week of preparation. "You're overthinking," he said gently. "I've heard you play the program a dozen times. It's beautiful. You're ready." "What if I forget something?" Elena said, pacing the practice room. "What if my hands freeze up? What if people expect Elena Sandoval, the competition winner, and all they get is Elena Martinez, the housekeeper who got lucky once?" Vincent stood up and walked over to her, stopping her pacing. "Do you know what I heard that night at the gala? I heard someone who'd suffered and sacrificed and kept going anyway. That came through in every note. Your music has depth because your life has depth. The technical stuff, yeah, you've got that. But what makes you special is that you play like someone who understands what really matters." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. "You've changed, you know. Since that night, I needed to," he said simply. "You showed me what I'd become, someone who'd forgotten why music mattered in the first place. I've been playing concerts and collecting praise, but I wasn't saying anything. I was just performing, going through the motions with perfect technique and empty heart. And now?" Elena asked. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to play like I mean it," Vincent said. "You're not the only one working on a comeback. Mine just looks different." The night of the recital arrived with startling speed. Elena stood backstage at Thompson Hall in a borrowed concert gown, deep blue with elegant lines that made her feel like someone she used to know. She could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of hundreds of voices, the rustle of programs. Dr. Whitmore appeared beside her, regal in black. The hall is sold out, she said with satisfaction. Standing room only. I haven't seen this kind of turnout in years. Elena's stomach flipped. That makes the pressure so much better, thank you. Dr. Whitmore laughed. You'll be fine. Better than fine. Just play for yourself. For your father. For everyone who sacrificed something for someone else and wondered if they'd ever get their own moment. Vincent arrived a moment later. He'd be in the audience, front row next to Elena's brothers. He handed her a small envelope. Don't open it until after, he said. It's just a note. Something I wanted you to have. The stage manager gave the 5-minute warning. Elena tucked the envelope into her small bag and took several deep breaths. Her hands were shaking again, just like they had at the gala. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't being challenged or mocked. She was being welcomed, celebrated, given a second chance that most people never got. The lights dimmed in the hall. The audience quieted. The stage manager nodded to her. You're on, Miss Sandoval, Miss Sandoval. Not Miss Martinez. Not the housekeeper, her music name. Her real name, the one she'd thought she'd lost forever. Elena walked onto the stage, and the applause that greeted her was warm and genuine. She could see her brothers in the front row, both of them grinning with pride. Next to them sat Vincent, his expression encouraging. Throughout the audience were faces from the gala, people who'd donated, people who'd believed in her story. She sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. The same preparation ritual she'd done thousands of times. Her hands found their positions on the keys. The hall went silent, waiting. Elena closed her eyes and let herself remember everything. Her father teaching her first scales on that old keyboard, the hours of practice, bleeding fingers and aching shoulders, the triumph of winning in Warsaw, the agony of walking away, the years of silence, the moment at the gala when music had chosen her again. She opened her eyes and began to play. The first piece was Chopin, of course. The same nocturne from the gala, but this time without fear or anger or anything to prove. Just honest, beautiful music. The notes filled the hall, reaching into corners and hearts, touching people who'd forgotten how powerful live music could be. Elena played her entire program with a confidence she'd earned through sacrifice and survival. Each piece told part of her story. The joy of early success, the grief of loss, the strength of keeping going, the hope of beginning again. By the time she reached her final piece, her own composition that she'd written years ago, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The final notes faded. The silence held for just a moment. Then the audience exploded. People weren't just clapping. They were on their feet shouting, some openly weeping. The ovation went on and on. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Later, in the dressing room, she remembered Vincent's envelope. She opened it with shaking hands and read the note inside. Elena, thank you for teaching me that music isn't about being the best. It's about being real. Tonight you didn't just make a comeback. You showed all of us what courage looks like. Your father would be so proud. I know I am. With respect and gratitude, Vincent. Elena folded the note carefully and tucked it into her bag. Tomorrow she'd start thinking about what came next. More recitals, maybe. Recording opportunities. Teaching, perhaps, passing on what she'd learned to the next generation of dreamers. But tonight she just let herself feel it. The joy of being exactly where she belonged. At the piano, making music. Living the dream she'd thought was gone forever. Sometimes life takes everything from you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives some of it back.